Some books merely inform, others entertain, but a rare few possess the unsettling power to alter the way you see existence itself. The Game of Life and How to Play It is one such book. For nearly a century, readers have described it as life-changing, mysterious, even dangerous. Not because it contains forbidden rituals, but because it proposes something far more radical. That the unseen world of thought, faith, expectation, and spoken words quietly shapes the visible world around us. Yet today, most people unknowingly use this power against themselves every single day, speaking limitation, fear, and defeat into existence without ever realizing it. In this exploration, we will uncover why this extraordinary book has been called one of the most dangerous spiritual texts ever written. We will journey through forgotten wisdom preserved by mystics, sages, and ancient traditions, revealing how faith dissolves struggle. Why imagination precedes manifestation, how gratitude unlocks hidden abundance, and why fear may be distorting the reality you see every day. Stay until the end because the final principle may completely alter the way you understand time, destiny, and your place in the universe. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Lack. There is a quiet illusion that has followed humanity since the first villages were built beside rivers and beneath mountains. It is not born from empty fields or empty hands. It begins much deeper in the hidden chambers of the mind. Long before a person lacks resources, they often begin to believe they lack possibility. The ancient philosophers observed this subtle shift with great concern, for they knew that the most dangerous poverty was not the absence of possessions, but the conviction that nothing more could ever emerge. An old saying whispered among wise elders declared, "The empty bowl is not always the one without food. Sometimes it is the one that refuses to see what has already been placed inside." This was not a lesson about denying hardship. Droughts came, harvests failed, empires collapsed. Genuine need has always existed. Music, but the ancients carefully distinguished between true necessity music and the endless dissatisfaction that quietly consumes the human heart. They understood something modern life often forgets. Scarcity can become a habit of perception. Imagine two farmers living in the same valley centuries ago. Both depended upon the same river. Both watched the same skies. Both prayed for the same rain. Then came a year unlike any before it. Clouds gathered but refused to open. The river retreated into cracked earth. Crops withered beneath the relentless sun, and every family feared the coming winter. The first farmer walked his fields every morning, repeating the same words. "There is nothing left. Music, the land has abandoned me. I am already defeated." As the days passed, he stopped repairing his fences because he believed there would be nothing worth protecting. He neglected the old well because he assumed it had already gone dry. He ignored the fruit trees growing along the edge of his property because they no longer fit the picture of abundance he carried in his mind. Meanwhile, the second farmer stood beneath the same burning sky. He did not pretend the drought was easy. He did not smile while his crops suffered. Yet every morning he asked a different question. What still remains? That single question changed everything. He discovered wild herbs growing beneath shaded rocks. He cleaned the forgotten well and found water deep beneath the surface. He bartered wisely with neighboring villages instead of isolating himself in despair. He harvested figs from trees planted decades earlier by his grandfather, trees he had almost forgotten. Neither man controlled the drought, but each was controlled by a different way of seeing it. Years later, people called one fortunate and the other unfortunate. The elders shook their heads gently. It was not fortune, they said. It was attention. The lesson hidden within this simple story has echoed through countless generations. Gratitude is not merely a pleasant emotion. It is a discipline of perception. It teaches the eyes to notice opportunities that fear quietly conceals. This does not mean gratitude magically removes difficulty. Rather, it prevents difficulty from becoming the only thing we can see. Modern psychology echoes this ancient observation. When the mind becomes fixated on loss, it begins filtering out evidence of possibility. Attention narrows. Creativity declines. Every setback appears permanent because the mind stops searching for alternatives. The ancient teachers understood this long before laboratory existed. Music, they watched kings lose kingdoms through despair, while humble craftsmen quietly rebuilt entire lives with little more than patience and disciplined attention. One wandering philosopher was once asked how a poor traveler could become wealthy. The listeners expected him to describe trade routes or clever bargains. Instead, he answered with another question. What wealth have you already refused to count? Silence filled the gathering. Some possessed knowledge they never shared. Others possessed friendships they had neglected. Some carried remarkable skills yet dismissed them because they compared themselves to wealthier neighbors. Many overlooked time itself. The one treasure equally entrusted to every person. The philosopher smiled. The mind that overlooks small blessings will overlook great opportunities as well. This is why gratitude appears in nearly every ancient wisdom tradition. It was never intended merely as politeness. It was training, daily practice, a deliberate reshaping of perception. A grateful mind notices. A fearful mind overlooks. One discovers doors, the other sees only walls. Perhaps this explains why some individuals seem capable of rebuilding after unimaginable hardship, while others remain imprisoned by circumstances long after those circumstances have changed. The difference often begins with the stories they repeatedly tell themselves about what remains possible. Look carefully at your own life, not at what is missing, at what has quietly remained. The friend who still answers your call, the wisdom earned through failure, the strength gained from surviving difficult seasons, the opportunities waiting behind skills you have almost forgotten. Abundance rarely arrives as loudly as we imagine. Sometimes it has been standing quietly beside us all along, waiting for our attention to finally recognize it. The ancient masters advised their students to begin every morning with one simple question. What still remains? Music, that question alone, has redirected countless lives, not as abundance already present. Only then can you recognize the opportunities still unfolding. Chapter 2. The Law of Imagination. Long before the first stone was placed upon the earth, the temple already existed. Not in marble, not in cedar, not beneath the open sky. It existed within the imagination of the builder. Every civilization that left behind monuments admired centuries later understood a truth easily overlooked today. Nothing meaningful is created twice. Every lasting achievement is first constructed in silence before it is ever revealed to the world. Ancient architects were known to spend months walking empty fields before a single foundation was laid. Observers often mistook this for hesitation. It was preparation. They were learning to see what did not yet exist. One master builder from antiquity was asked why he spent so much time staring at bare ground. He replied gently, "Because I am not looking at the earth. I am looking at the temple hidden inside it." His apprentices laughed quietly, believing the old man had become lost in dreams. Years later, visitors crossed kingdoms to admire the finished sanctuary. Only then did the students understand. Music, the temple had not appeared suddenly. It had simply become visible. This ancient lesson extends far beyond architecture. Every invention, every masterpiece, every courageous journey, and every transformed life begins first as an unseen possibility held steadily within the imagination. The philosophers never regarded imagination as childish fantasy. They treated music, it as one of humanity's greatest creative faculties. Plato suggested that visible forms reflect deeper realities grasped first by the mind. Later thinkers observed that every meaningful action follows an inner picture of what is possible. Whether a person seeks wisdom, crafts a work of art, or simply changes a long-held habit, the process begins with a vision that quietly guides each step. History repeatedly reflects this pattern. Explorers imagined coastlines before reaching them. Inventors envisioned solutions before building them. Great leaders often carried a picture of a better future long before others believed it could exist. The imagination does not replace effort. It gives effort direction. Without vision, activity becomes scattered. With vision, even small actions begin moving toward a meaningful destination. There is an old parable about a sculptor who stood before an enormous block of stone. Passers-by mocked him because they saw only rough granite. For weeks he chipped away patiently, Someone finally asked, "How did you know a beautiful figure was hidden inside that stone?" The sculptor smiled. "Music, I did not create it. I simply removed everything that did not belong." So it is with human character. The person you hope to become is not built in a single moment of inspiration. It is revealed gradually as unnecessary fears, limiting beliefs, and forgotten habits are patiently carved away. The imagination serves as the blueprint for that inner work. It allows you to rehearse wisdom before the difficult conversation arrives, to picture courage before fear appears, and to become familiar with integrity long before it is tested. Many ancient schools encourage their students to spend time each day quietly contemplating the kind of person they wish to become. Not the wealth they hope to gather, not the praise they hope to receive, but the character they wish to embody, for they understood a profound truth. Possessions can be lost, titles can disappear, character remains. Spend a few moments each day imagining yourself acting with patience where you once reacted with anger. See yourself speaking with confidence where doubt once ruled. Picture yourself responding with generosity where fear once held tightly. These quiet rehearsals do not guarantee a particular outcome, but they prepare the mind to recognize possibilities and respond with greater intention when opportunities arise. The builder sees the temple before the stone is shaped. The gardener envisions the harvest before the first seed is planted. The wise person imagines the character they seek to cultivate before music, life, asks them to reveal it. Do not spend all your imagination on what you wish to possess. Spend even more imagining the person you are becoming. For every enduring creation begins unseen, and the greatest masterpiece you will ever build is your own character. Chapter 3. Non-resistance opens the way. There is an old story told among wandering sages about a river that spent centuries trying to reach the sea. Along its path stood cliffs, forests, deserts, and valleys. Yet its greatest obstacle was a single enormous stone resting in the center of its course. Travelers who visited the place year after year expected the river to stop there forever. The stone appeared immovable, ancient beyond memory, a monument to permanence itself. But when the travelers returned decades later, something astonishing had happened. The stone had not moved. The river had. Rather than exhausting itself by striking the rock with greater force each season, the water quietly discovered another path. It curved around the obstacle, slowly widening its banks until the once insurmountable barrier became nothing more than part of the landscape. Eventually, the same river that refused to fight the stone music carried tiny grains of sand that polished its rough edges smooth. The sages smiled whenever they told this story. The river never defeated the stone. They would say it simply refused to become its prisoner. This is one of the oldest lessons preserved in ancient philosophy. Many people believe strength is measured by how hard they push against life. They imagine that every obstacle demands greater force, louder arguments, tighter control, and relentless resistance. Yet, the wisest teachers observed a different pattern. They noticed that excessive force often strengthens the very struggle it hopes to eliminate. Resistance has a curious nature. The more fiercely we insist that reality should already be different, the more energy we surrender to frustration. We begin fighting not only our circumstances, but also our own thoughts. The present moment becomes an enemy instead of a teacher. This does not mean accepting injustice or abandoning meaningful effort. The ancient masters never praised passivity. They praised intelligent response. There is a profound difference between surrendering to life and cooperating with its rhythms. The Taoist sages spoke often of water because they believed it revealed the highest form of strength. Water possesses no rigid shape, yet over time it carves mountains. It never argues with gravity. It follows the path available to it, adapting without losing its direction. Its power comes not from aggression, but from persistence guided by wisdom. Centuries later, Stoic philosophers reached a remarkably similar conclusion through different language. They advised their students to distinguish carefully between what lies within their influence and what does not. Energy spent resisting the unavoidable weakens the mind. Energy directed clears throat. Toward one's own character strengthens it. Although separated by continents and cultures, Both traditions quietly pointed toward the same truth. Peace begins when struggle is no longer wasted on the uncontrollable. An old monastery once stood beside a dense bamboo forest. Every autumn, fierce storms swept across the valley, snapping mighty oak branches like dry twigs. Young students often asked the elder monk why the bamboo survived while larger trees fell. Music, instead of answering immediately, the old monk led them into the forest after the storm. The bamboo bent almost to the ground beneath the weight of the wind, but it did not break. When the storm passed, every stalk rose again, unchanged except for a few scattered leaves. The monk placed his hand gently upon the smooth green stem. Strength that refuses to bend eventually shatters. The students never forgot those words. Many years later, they understood that the lesson had never been about plants. It had been about themselves. How often do we cling to expectations long after life has invited us toward another path? How often do we exhaust ourselves demanding that yesterday return or tomorrow arrive sooner? The greatest suffering frequently grows not from what happens, but from our refusal to release what can no longer be controlled. Modern psychology echoes this ancient observation. When the mind resists painful emotions, those emotions often become more persistent. Anxiety resisted becomes deeper anxiety. Anger resisted quietly transforms into bitterness. Grief denied lingers beneath every conversation. Acceptance, however, creates space for wise action. It allows the mind to stop fighting reality long enough to ask, what is the next right step? This is the hidden power of non-resistance. It clears the fog. A sailor crossing an unpredictable sea understands this instinctively. He cannot command the wind. He cannot silence the storm. But by adjusting his sails, he can still move toward his destination. The sea has not become easier. The sailor has become wiser. So it is with life. When disappointment arrives, acknowledge it. When plans change, adapt them. When obstacles appear, study them before attacking them. The river reaches the sea not because it overpowers every stone, but because it never forgets where it is going. There are moments when courage looks like standing firm. There are other moments when courage looks like changing direction without abandoning purpose. The wise know the difference today. Within that space lives freedom. The old traveler eventually completed his journey across the desert, not because the world became less dangerous, but because he learned to turn around whenever fear whispered too loudly. Again and again, he discovered that many shadows disappeared the moment he faced them. Perhaps this is why the ancient teachers insisted that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to examine fear before surrendering to it. Every shadow deserves observation. Not every shadow deserves obedience. Question every fear before obeying it, for many of the barriers that seem to stand before you are nothing more than darkness waiting for the light of awareness. Chapter 6. Faith dissolves struggle. One of the greatest paradoxes preserved in ancient wisdom is this. The tighter a person grasps the current of life, the more exhausted they become. At first this seems impossible. Surely greater effort produces greater results. Surely relentless control guarantees success. Yet those who spent their lives studying the rhythms of nature noticed another pattern entirely. The flower does not struggle to bloom. The dawn does not strain to become morning. The seasons arrive without anxiety. Only human beings often confuse constant tension with meaningful progress. There is an old story of two archers who sought instruction from a celebrated master. Both possessed remarkable talent. Both practiced from sunrise until darkness covered the mountains. One student became increasingly desperate with every missed target. He tightened his grip upon the bow until his hands shook. He calculated every breath, feared every mistake, and judged every imperfect shot as failure. The harder he tried, the farther his arrows wandered from the center. The second student listened quietly. The master gave him unusual advice. Before aiming at the target, become still enough to notice your own heartbeat. The young archer was puzzled. He expected secret techniques. Instead, he was taught silence. Weeks passed while the first student continued battling the target. The second learned to relax his shoulders, soften his breathing, and release the arrow without forcing perfection. One afternoon, the master smiled as the arrow landed cleanly at the center. It was never the target resisting you. He said it was your struggle. This story survived because it reveals something profound about the human condition. Many people unknowingly fight life itself. They become so attached to immediate outcomes that every delay feels like failure, and every obstacle becomes personal. They spend enormous energy attempting to control circumstances that have never belonged entirely to them. Ancient teachers consistently warned against this trap. Trust does not mean doing nothing. Trust means doing what is yours to do without demanding that the universe obey your timetable. There is a quiet distinction here. Passive waiting abandons responsibility. Faithful action embraces responsibility while releasing the illusion of total control. Farmers understood this instinctively. They prepared the soil with care. They planted wisely. They watered patiently. Yet no amount of anxiety could command the rain. No amount of frustration could accelerate the seasons. Music. Their work ended where nature's work began. This partnership between effort and trust formed the heart of many ancient philosophies. Music. The Stoics urged people to devote themselves fully to what lay within their character while accepting what remained beyond it. Taoist sages spoke of moving with the current rather than exhausting oneself by swimming endlessly against it. Different cultures expressed the insight in different words, yet the lesson remained remarkably consistent. Wise action is calm action. Modern research supports this observation. Under extreme stress, judgment often deteriorates, decision-making becomes impulsive, creativity declines, and the mind loses access to broader perspectives. Calmness, by contrast, allows greater flexibility, clearer reasoning, and more thoughtful responses. The ancient masters did not possess scientific terminology, but they recognized these truths through careful observation of life. An elderly gardener was once asked how he remained peaceful after repeated crop failures. He knelt beside a young tree before answering, "I have learned the difference between caring deeply and clinging desperately." The visitor asked what that meant. The old man smiled. "I water the roots every morning. I cannot pull the branches to make them grow faster. How many lives are burdened by invisible pulling? People try to force relationships before trust has matured. They force success before developing wisdom. They force certainty where patience is required. In doing music so, they create the very tension that clouds judgment and delays meaningful progress. Faith is not wishful thinking. It is disciplined music, confidence expressed through steady action. It allows effort without panic, commitment without desperation, perseverance without constant fear. Perhaps this is why truly wise people often appear surprisingly calm in difficult seasons. They are not indifferent. They are fully engaged. But they understand that frantic control rarely produces wise outcomes. Their energy flows toward what can actually be cultivated. Character, preparation, kindness, discipline, and clear perception. Everything else is met with patience. As you continue your own journey, remember the lesson of the archer. Grip your purpose firmly, but do not grip life so tightly that your own hands begin to tremble. Rerails what cannot be controlled. Strengthen what can. Aim carefully, then let the arrow fly. Replace frantic control with deliberate action, for peace is not found by abandoning effort. Ask yourself a quiet question. Where in your life are you striking the same stone over and over again? Could there be another path you have refused to notice simply because it does not resemble the one you originally imagined? The river teaches us that movement is more important than stubbornness. The bamboo reminds us that flexibility is often greater strength than force. Respond instead of resisting. Sometimes the path opens music, not because the world changes, but because you do. Chapter 4. Gratitude before the harvest went. One of the most surprising customs of the ancient world took place long before the harvest was certain. In villages scattered across fertile valleys and mountain terraces, farmers gathered with their families while the fields were still green. The grain had not yet ripened. The fruit still clung tightly to young branches. Storms could still arrive. Drought could still return. Nothing was guaranteed, and yet they gave thanks. To the impatient observer, the ritual seemed almost irrational. Why celebrate before success? Why express gratitude before certainty? The elders answered with remarkable simplicity, because the grateful heart prepares itself to receive what fear cannot even recognize. This tradition was never merely ceremonial. It reflected a profound understanding of the human mind. The ancients knew that appreciation transforms attention. A person consumed entirely by what is absent often overlooks what is quietly growing. Imagine two gardeners tending neighboring orchards. Each plants identical seeds beneath the same spring sky. Weeks pass with little visible change. The first gardener walks through his field every morning complaining that nothing is happening. He grows impatient, neglects watering, and eventually abandons several young trees because he assumes they have failed. The second gardener walks the same rows with different eyes. He notices tiny shoots breaking through the soil. He clears weeds from around fragile roots. He waters consistently, not because he already sees fruit, but because he trusts the unseen process unfolding beneath the earth. Months later, visitors praise his abundant orchard. They call him fortunate. The old gardener simply smiles. They did not see the gratitude that watered these trees long before the fruit appeared. This is one of the quiet mysteries repeated throughout ancient wisdom traditions. Gratitude does not alter the laws of nature, nor does it guarantee that every hope will be fulfilled exactly as imagined. What it changes is the person who practices it. A grateful mind becomes attentive. It notices possibilities. It values relationships. It protects opportunities that an impatient mind often ignores. Modern psychology offers a similar insight. Researchers have found that appreciation broadens attention, increases resilience, and encourages creative problem solving. When individuals regularly reflect on what is meaningful rather than exclusively on what is lacking, they tend to recognize more opportunities for growth and connection. The ancients discovered this through observation long before science gave it language. An old craftsman once accepted two apprentices. Both possessed equal talent. One complained endlessly about imperfect tools, difficult customers, and slow progress. The other thanked his teacher each evening for one lesson learned that day. No matter how small, years later, the second apprentice became a master admired throughout the region. When asked about the secret of his success, he did not mention superior skill. He said, "Gratitude taught me to notice what every difficult day was trying to teach." Ordinary moments are easily dismissed because they arrive quietly. A shared meal, a faithful friend, music, the strength to begin again after failure, a sunrise witnessed without hurry, the breath that enters your lungs without asking permission. These gifts rarely announce themselves with greatness, yet they slowly build the foundation upon which every meaningful life is constructed. Perhaps this is why ancient teachers encouraged their students to begin and end each day with gratitude. Not because every day was easy, but because every day contained something worthy of careful attention. Music, gratitude, is not denial. It is disciplined perception. Music, it refuses to let hardship become the only story. Before the harvest appears, appreciate the seed. Before success arrives, honor the effort. Before tomorrow unfolds, cherish today. For the person who learns to recognize quiet blessings is often the very person prepared to cultivate greater ones. Guy thanks before results appear. Sometimes the harvest begins in the heart long before it reaches the field. Chapter 5. Fear casts shadows. There is an old tale told among desert caravans of a traveler who refused to continue his journey after sunset. Music every evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, he would catch sight of a dark figure stretching across the sand behind him. Convinced that someone was following him, he abandoned campsites, changed routes, and spent countless sleepless nights preparing for an attack that never came. One evening, an elderly guide quietly approached him and lit a single lantern. The traveler turned. The terrifying figure instantly shrank. It was his own shadow. The old guide smiled with compassion rather than laughter. "You have not been fleeing an enemy," he said softly. "You have been fleeing the shape cast by your own position." The traveler stood in silence. His greatest fear had never possessed substance of its own. It had borrowed its power from darkness and distance. The wise preserved this story because they understood something timeless about the human mind. Fear often behaves like a shadow. It begins as a small uncertainty, But when left unexamined, it stretches across the imagination until it appears larger than reality itself. Fear has always served a noble purpose. Without it, our ancestors would not have survived dangerous forests, unpredictable seas, or harsh winters. It warned them of genuine threats and encouraged careful preparation. But the ancient philosophers also recognized another kind of fear, one that protected nothing. It lived almost entirely within imagined futures, convincing people to suffer events that had never actually arrived. This distinction became one of the foundations of wisdom. There is caution and there is panic. Caution asks, "How may I prepare?" Panic insists disaster has already begun. The difference between the two determines whether fear becomes a faithful guide or a relentless tyrant. Centuries ago, before armies marched into uncertain battles, experienced commanders observed their youngest soldiers carefully. They noticed that those consumed by fear often exhausted themselves before the music fighting even began. Their breathing became shallow, their hands trembled, their minds raced ahead, imagining every possible defeat. By the time the first signal sounded, they had already fought 100 invisible battles inside their own thoughts. Veteran warriors behaved differently. They did not pretend fear was absent. They simply refused to let it become commander. Many traditions trained soldiers to steady their breathing before lifting their swords. Some stood silently beneath the morning sky. Others repeated simple phrases that reminded them to remain present. Their preparation was not merely physical. It was psychological, for they understood that a frightened mind rarely sees clearly. Fear narrows perception like a tunnel. It focuses attention so completely upon danger that every other possibility quietly disappears. Opportunities go unnoticed. Music-wise counsel is ignored. Small problems become overwhelming because the imagination magnifies them beyond proportion. Modern psychology describes this phenomenon with remarkable precision. When fear dominates the nervous system, attention becomes selective. The brain prioritizes potential threats while overlooking evidence of safety, creativity, or alternative solutions. The ancients reached the same conclusion without laboratories. Music, they simply watched human beings long enough to recognize the pattern. An old philosopher once walked through a crowded marketplace carrying a small mirror. His students asked why. He replied, "To remind myself where fear truly begins." Seeing their confusion, he explained, "Most dangers appear first outside us, but the suffering they create often grows inside us." His words echoed a truth countless generations have rediscovered. Events influence us. Interpretation governs us. Think about your own life. How many sleepless nights were spent worrying about conversations that unfolded peacefully? How many opportunities were abandoned because imagined failure appeared more convincing than unseen possibility? How many years were surrendered to fears that never crossed the threshold from imagination into reality? This does not mean every fear is false. Some dangers deserve respect. The wise person does not ignore warning signs or reject careful planning. But wisdom asks another question before obedience. Is this fear revealing reality or merely projecting possibility? That single question creates space between emotion and action. Within that space lives freedom. The old traveler eventually completed his journey across the desert, not because the world became less dangerous, but because he learned to turn around whenever fear whispered too loudly. Again and again, he discovered that many shadows disappeared the moment he faced them. Perhaps this is why the ancient teachers insisted that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to examine fear before surrendering to it. Every shadow deserves observation. Not every shadow deserves obedience. Question every fear before obeying it, for many of the barriers that seem to stand before you are nothing more than darkness waiting for the light of awareness. Chapter 6. Faith dissolves struggle. One of the greatest paradoxes preserved in ancient wisdom is this. The tighter a person grasps the current of life, the more exhausted they become. At first this seems impossible. Surely greater effort produces greater results. Surely relentless control guarantees success. Music, yet those who spent their lives studying the rhythms of nature noticed another pattern entirely. The flower does not struggle to bloom. The dawn does not strain to become morning. The seasons arrive without anxiety. Only human beings often confuse constant tension with meaningful progress. There is an old story of two archers who sought instruction from a celebrated master. Both possessed remarkable talent. Both practiced from sunrise until darkness covered the mountains. One student became increasingly desperate with every missed target. He tightened his grip upon the bow until his hands shook. He calculated every breath, feared every mistake, and judged every imperfect shot as failure. The harder he tried, the farther his arrows wandered from the center. The second student listened quietly. The master gave him unusual advice. Before aiming at the target, become still enough to notice your own heartbeat. The young archer was puzzled. He expected secret techniques. Instead, he was taught silence. Weeks passed while the first student continued battling the target. The second learned to relax his shoulders, soften his breathing, and release the arrow without forcing perfection. One afternoon, the master smiled as the arrow landed cleanly at the center. It was never the target resisting you. He said it was your struggle. This story survived because it reveals something profound about the human condition. Many people unknowingly fight life itself. They become so attached to immediate outcomes that every delay feels like failure, and every obstacle becomes personal. They spend enormous energy attempting to control circumstances that have never belonged entirely to them. Ancient teachers consistently warned against this trap. Trust does not mean doing nothing. Trust means doing what is yours to do without demanding that the universe obey your timetable. There is a quiet distinction here. Passive waiting abandons responsibility. Faithful action embraces responsibility while releasing the illusion of total control. Farmers understood this instinctively. They prepared the soil with care. They planted wisely. They watered patiently. Yet no amount of anxiety could command the rain. No amount of frustration could accelerate the seasons. Music. Their work ended where nature's work began. This partnership between effort and trust formed the heart of many ancient philosophies. Music. The Stoics urged people to devote themselves fully to what lay within their character while accepting what remained beyond it. Taoist sages spoke of moving with the current rather than exhausting oneself by swimming endlessly against it. Different cultures expressed the insight in different words, yet the lesson remained remarkably consistent. Wise action is calm action. Modern research supports this observation. Under extreme stress, judgment often deteriorates, decision-making becomes impulsive, creativity declines, and the mind loses access to broader perspectives. Calmness, by contrast, allows greater flexibility, clearer reasoning, and more thoughtful responses. The ancient masters did not possess scientific terminology, but they recognized these truths through careful observation of life. An elderly gardener was once asked how he remained peaceful after repeated crop failures. He knelt beside a young tree before answering, "I have learned the difference between caring deeply and clinging desperately." The visitor asked what that meant. The old man smiled. "I water the roots every morning. I cannot pull the branches to make them grow faster. How many lives are burdened by invisible pulling? People try to force relationships before trust has matured. They force success before developing wisdom. They force certainty where patience is required. In doing music so, they create the very tension that clouds judgment and delays meaningful progress. Faith is not wishful thinking. It is disciplined music, confidence expressed through steady action. It allows effort without panic, commitment without desperation, perseverance without constant fear. Perhaps this is why truly wise people often appear surprisingly calm in difficult seasons. They are not indifferent. They are fully engaged. But they understand that frantic control rarely produces wise outcomes. Their energy flows toward what can actually be cultivated. Character, preparation, kindness, discipline, and clear perception. Everything else is met with patience. As you continue your own journey, remember the lesson of the archer. Grip your purpose firmly, but do not grip life so tightly that your own hands begin to tremble. Rerails what cannot be controlled. Strengthen what can. Aim carefully, then let the arrow fly. Replace frantic control with deliberate action, for peace is not found by abandoning effort. It is found when effort is finally guided by wisdom instead of fear. Chapter 7. Expectation quietly shapes experience. Long before philosophers wrote their observations onto parchment, travelers noticed an unusual truth. While crossing distant kingdoms, two people could walk the same road, pass through the same village, meet the same strangers, and yet return with entirely different stories. One would describe a land filled with kindness, opportunity, and unexpected friendships. The other would speak only of suspicion, hardship, and disappointment. The road had remained unchanged. Only the travelers had been different. An elderly teacher once asked his students a simple question before leading them into a neighboring city. "What do you expect to find there?" One young man answered immediately, "Greedy merchants, dishonest people, and endless problems." Another smiled quietly. "I expect challenges," he replied. "But I also expect to learn something valuable." The old teacher nodded without correcting either answer. When they returned several days later, he gathered them beneath an ancient olive tree. The first student complained exactly as he had predicted. Every rude customer confirmed his belief. Every inconvenience became proof that the world was unfair. The second spoke of generous strangers who offered directions, skilled craftsmen willing to share their knowledge, and conversations that changed the way he viewed his own future. The teacher listened patiently before saying something neither student expected. "Music, the city simply reflected what each of you was prepared to notice." This lesson has echoed quietly through countless generations. Expectation does not magically reshape reality. It shapes attention, and attention quietly shapes experience. The human mind is remarkable in this way. It constantly searches for evidence that confirms what it already believes. If someone expects betrayal, they become experts at detecting signs of rejection while overlooking gestures of loyalty. If another expects opportunity, they naturally notice doors that fear might have ignored. The ancients observed this long before psychology gave it a name. They understood that expectation acts like an invisible lantern. Wherever it points, awareness follows. Everything outside its light often disappears into darkness. There is an old account of two merchants who entered the same bustling marketplace just after sunrise. The first merchant arrived expecting failure. Business had been difficult in recent months, and he believed fortune had abandoned him forever. As he walked among the crowded stalls, he noticed only competitors with larger displays, customers who walked past without stopping, and minor inconveniences that confirmed his discouragement. Music by midday, he packed his goods and left, convinced the market had become hopeless. The second merchant entered through the very same gate only moments later. He too had experienced losses. He too faced uncertainty. Yet he expected that somewhere within the crowd someone genuinely needed what he carried. Instead of counting every obstacle, he searched patiently for conversations. He greeted strangers warmly, listened carefully, adjusted his approach, and remained attentive long after others surrendered. As evening approached, he returned home with modest profit and several new relationships that later became his greatest opportunities. The marketplace had offered both men the same possibilities. Their expectations determined which possibilities they noticed. This does not mean optimism should become fantasy. The ancient philosophers repeatedly warned against confusing hope with illusion. A sailor who expects calm seas every day is unprepared for storms. A farmer who assumes every season guarantees abundance neglects wisdom. True expectation walks beside realism rather than replacing it. The Stoics encouraged their students music, to prepare carefully for difficulty while refusing to become prisoners of despair. They expected obstacles because life naturally contains them. Yet they also expected that character, discipline, and thoughtful action would provide a path through those obstacles. Hope was never blind. It was disciplined. Likewise, many ancient teachers encourage people to begin each morning by asking not, "What will go wrong today?" but, "What opportunity might appear if I remain attentive?" That single question quietly transforms perception. Modern psychology confirms what these observers discovered centuries ago. Expectations influence behavior in subtle ways. A confident person often smiles first, speaks more openly, persists longer after setbacks, and notices encouragement others overlook. These small differences accumulate over time until they appear to outsiders as remarkable luck. Yet much of what we call luck begins with prepared attention. Imagine carrying two different maps through the same forest. One highlights only danger. The other marks hidden springs, safe paths, and places of shelter while still acknowledging cliffs and rivers. Both maps describe the same landscape, music, but one encourages paralysis, the other encourages wise movement. Expectation functions much the same way. It is not a prediction. It is a direction for awareness. Ask yourself honestly, what have you been expecting from life lately? Have you quietly rehearsed disappointment so often that success now feels unfamiliar? Have you anticipated rejection so consistently that genuine acceptance slips past unnoticed? Or have you trained yourself to recognize possibilities while remaining grounded enough to prepare for reality? Ancient wisdom invites neither naive optimism nor habitual pessimism. It invites alert hope. Walk forward with open eyes. Prepare diligently. Remain teachable. Believe that opportunities exist, music, but meet them with effort rather than entitlement. The world rarely becomes exactly what we imagine. Yet our expectations often determine which part of that world eventually becomes our experience. Expect possibilities. Prepare diligently, for the future often arrives, wearing the face you have been quietly searching for. Chapter 8. The Kingdom is Within. There is a mystery that countless seekers overlooked because it appeared too simple to be extraordinary. Many spent their lives climbing mountains, crossing music deserts, collecting treasures, chasing recognition, and searching distant lands for a fulfillment that seemed forever one step beyond the horizon. Music. Yet the oldest sages often pointed in the opposite direction, not outward, inward. An old wanderer once heard rumors of a hidden kingdom unlike any other. Travelers claimed that whoever entered its gates would discover unshakable peace and a wealth that no thief could steal. The man sold everything he owned and devoted decades to finding it. He crossed frozen mountain passes. He sailed dangerous seas. He visited magnificent cities where scholars debated wisdom beneath music, towering libraries. He questioned kings, merchants, monks, and shepherds. Each offered another direction. Each promised that the kingdom lay just beyond the next journey. Finally, music, exhausted by years of searching, he returned to the humble village where his travels had begun. Music, there he met an elderly woman tending a small garden. Seeing the weariness in his face, she asked gently what he had been seeking. "The hidden kingdom," music answered. She smiled as though hearing a familiar story. Then she handed him a small bowl of water. "Look," he expected to see some magical vision. Instead, he saw only his own reflection. "The longest journey," she whispered, "was the distance between your eyes and your own heart." The wanderer stood motionless. For the first time in many years, he stopped searching. And only then did he begin discovering this ancient parable survives, because it speaks to a temptation that accompanies every generation. Human beings naturally seek fulfillment through acquisition. We imagine that one more achievement, one more possession, one more title, or one more victory will finally quiet the restlessness within us. Yet experience quietly teaches another lesson. Every external accomplishment eventually becomes ordinary. The new house becomes familiar. The promotion becomes routine. The applause fades. The excitement settles. Then the restless mind begins searching again. The ancient philosophers noticed this endless cycle and asked an uncomfortable question. What if the hunger is not outside you at all? Many concluded that lasting contentment cannot be purchased because it belongs to a different dimension of life altogether. It grows through self-knowledge. A person who understands their own fears is less easily manipulated by them. A person who understands their own desires chooses them more wisely. A person who understands their own character carries peace into circumstances that once produced chaos. This is the true wealth the sages guarded: music, not secret riches, corn stability. An old craftsman accepted many apprentices throughout his lifetime. Whenever a new student arrived, they expected to learn advanced techniques immediately. Instead, the master gave each apprentice the same first assignment. For 30 days, they were instructed simply to observe themselves. Notice impatience. Notice pride. Notice envy. Notice gratitude, not moments of genuine joy. Most students consider the exercise meaningless until they realize something remarkable. The quality of their work always reflected the condition of their mind. A distracted craftsman created careless work. An angry craftsman produced rough edges. A peaceful craftsman shaped beauty almost effortlessly. The workshop had quietly become a mirror. So had life. Modern psychology offers language for what these ancient observers already understood. People who cultivate emotional awareness, reflection, and inner purpose often experience greater resilience, healthier relationships, and more enduring well-being than those who pursue external rewards alone. The external world matters, but it cannot permanently organize an inner world left in confusion. Consider a garden. Many people decorate the fence while neglecting the soil. The fence impresses visitors. The soil determines whether anything truly grows. Your inner life is that soil. Every thought planted repeatedly becomes easier to think. Every habit repeated patiently becomes part of identity. Every act of forgiveness softens the ground. Every honest reflection removes another hidden stone. The harvest that follows may eventually appear in your work, your relationships, and your decisions, but its roots remain invisible. Perhaps this explains why the wisest elders often seemed peaceful regardless of circumstance. Their security did not depend entirely upon changing conditions because they had spent years cultivating something no storm could easily destroy. An ordered mind, a grateful heart, a clear conscience, a quiet spirit. These treasures cannot be inherited. They cannot be purchased. They must be cultivated. Each day offers another opportunity. Spend a few moments in silence before chasing the world's demands. Ask yourself difficult questions with honesty rather than judgment. Ride words that elevate your thinking. Protect your attention from constant noise. Practice gratitude without needing perfect music circumstances. Little by little, your inner world becomes stronger than the distractions surrounding it. Then something unexpected happens. Music success becomes meaningful without becoming your identity. Loss becomes painful without destroying your peace. Achievement becomes joyful without becoming an addiction. The ancient kingdom was never hidden because it wished to exclude you. It was hidden because most people never thought to look within. Build your inner world daily, for the richest life is always constructed from the inside outward. Chapter 9. Blessing multiplies what it touches. Long before kingdoms measured wealth by overflowing treasuries, the wisest elders measured prosperity in a very different way. They believed that whatever a person consistently honored would quietly increase in value, not through magic, not through chance, but because attention changes everything it touches. There is an old story of a gardener who lived on the edge of a forgotten valley. Travelers often passed his small orchard on their journeys to larger cities, and many wondered why his trees produced sweeter fruit than the vast estates owned by wealthy nobles. His garden was modest, his tools were old, his land was ordinary, yet every season his harvest seemed richer than the last. One spring, a young man stopped beside the old gardener and asked the question that everyone secretly carried. "What is your secret?" Gardener smiled, resting both hands upon the handle of his worn shovel. "I greet every tree before I prune it." The traveler laughed politely, believing the old man was joking. But the gardener continued, "I care for every branch before it bears fruit. I water the soil before it becomes dry. I remove weeds before they steal strength from the roots. Most people celebrate abundance after it arrives." He paused, gently brushing dust from a young olive branch. "I choose to honor it before it appears." The young traveler remained silent. Years later, after building orchards of his own, he finally understood the harvest had never begun in autumn. It had begun every ordinary morning when no one was watching. This simple parable contains one of the oldest principles of human flourishing. Whatever receives consistent care becomes stronger. Whatever is neglected slowly weakens, even if it once appeared abundant. Many people spend their lives asking how to receive more while overlooking what has already been placed in their hands. They dream of larger homes while neglecting the peace within the one they already inhabit. They desire stronger friendships while forgetting to nurture the relationships that quietly sustain them. They long for greater opportunities while treating today's responsibilities as burdens instead of preparation. The ancient teachers repeatedly warned against this habit. To overlook today's gifts is often to become blind to tomorrow's. There is a quiet law hidden within ordinary life. Attention nourishes, neglect music diminishes. This principle extends far beyond gardens. A marriage grows through daily kindness more than dramatic declarations. Health is preserved through countless small choices rather than occasional bursts of discipline. Wisdom deepens through consistent study, reflection, and humility instead of sudden inspiration. Even time itself responds to stewardship. Those who protect their hours from endless distraction gradually discover that a single day contains more possibility than years spent without intention. The old philosophers understood that blessing was never merely spoken. It was practiced to bless something meant to treat it as valuable, to care for it, to protect it, to cultivate its highest potential. In doing so, the person offering the blessing was transformed as much as the object receiving it. An elderly craftsman once accepted a young apprentice known for extraordinary talent. Within weeks, the apprentice grew impatient. "I am ready for greater work," he insisted. Instead of responding directly, the master handed him a simple wooden hammer. "For the next month," he said, "care for this tool as though your future depends upon it." The apprentice was disappointed. Each evening he cleaned the hammer, repaired its handle, sharpened its edges, and stored it carefully. When the month ended, the master finally explained, "You believed I was teaching you to protect a hammer." He smiled. "I was teaching you to become the kind of person who protects everything entrusted to him." That lesson shaped the apprentice far more than any advanced technique. Character grows through stewardship. Modern psychology quietly agrees with these ancient observations. People who intentionally appreciate their relationships, organize their environments, care for their health, and value their time often experience greater satisfaction and resilience. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because attention naturally strengthens music, what it consistently serves. Think for a moment about your own life. What have you been asking to increase? Peace, friendship, health, opportunity. Now ask another question. Have you been honoring the small beginnings of those very gifts? The musician who treasures daily practice eventually performs with confidence. The parent who patiently invests time in conversation builds trust that no wealth can purchase. The student who respects each lesson gradually discovers mastery. Greatness rarely arrives all at once. It accumulates quietly through faithful attention. Many people search endlessly for extraordinary opportunities while overlooking ordinary responsibilities. Yet history repeatedly reminds us that extraordinary lives are almost always constructed from ordinary acts performed consistently. The gardener did not command the trees to bear fruit. He simply created the conditions in which growth became possible. Music. The same wisdom applies to every area of life. Honor your health before illness reminds you of its value. Honor your relationships before distance reveals their importance. Honor your time before regret counts what distraction has stolen. Honor your character before success places greater responsibility upon your shoulders. Blessing is not wishful thinking. It is disciplined appreciation expressed through consistent action. Every moment offers another opportunity to cultivate what already exists. The old gardener understood something many never discover. The richest harvest belongs not merely to those who receive the most. It belongs to those who faithfully care for what they already possess. Honor what has already been entrusted to you, for whatever is truly cherished has a remarkable way of quietly multiplying. Chapter 10. Time bows to patience. Before the first green shoot ever breaks through the earth, music, an invisible miracle, has already begun. Deep beneath the surface where no eye can witness it, the seed is changing. Its outer shell softens. High roots begin searching through darkness. Life awakens long before proof appears. Nature has always understood something that restless human beings frequently forget. The most important growth is often invisible. An impatient observer walking through a field only days after planting might conclude that nothing is happening. Music. The ground appears unchanged. The wind moves quietly across empty soil. Silence reigns where effort was once poured. Music, yet beneath every step, thousands of unseen transformations are taking place. The ancients watched these mysteries year after year. They realized that life unfolds according to seasons' music, rather than impatience. This understanding shaped the wisdom of generations. There is an old account of a young farmer who visited an elderly olive grower famous throughout the region. Hoping to become wealthy quickly, the young man eagerly asked how long it would take before his music, first grove produced abundant fruit. The old grower answered calmly. "If the seasons are kind, perhaps 15 years, the young farmer frowned. "And if I work twice as hard," the old man smiled. "Perhaps 20. Confused, the young man protested. "Music, how can greater effort require more time?" The elder pointed toward a magnificent olive tree whose thick trunk stretched high into the morning sky. "If you become obsessed with speed," he said, "you will neglect the roots." Then he rested his hand upon the ancient bark. "This tree has survived storms, droughts, and generations of changing kingdoms because someone long ago was willing to plant what they themselves might never fully enjoy." The young farmer never forgot those words. Patience, he realized, was not waiting without purpose. It was working faithfully while respecting the pace of reality. Many of history's greatest achievements followed this quiet rhythm. Ancient temples rose stone by stone across decades. Braster craftsmen devoted years to learning skills invisible to ordinary observers. Wise teachers spent lifetimes shaping a handful of students whose influence continued long after their own voices had fallen silent. Nothing truly enduring was rushed. Yet modern minds often struggle against this ancient truth. We live surrounded by immediate answers, instant communication, music, and rapid results. Gradually, we begin expecting life itself to obey the same rhythm. When growth appears slow, discouragement whispers that nothing is changing. When success delays its arrival, many abandon the very path that was quietly leading toward it. The greatest danger of impatience is not emotional discomfort. It is premature surrender. The Taoist sages observed rivers for this very reason. Water never hurries toward the sea. It follows its course faithfully, wearing away mountains through consistency rather than force. Likewise, the Stoic philosophers reminded their students that meaningful character develops through repeated choices made over time. Virtue cannot be borrowed. Wisdom cannot be rushed. Inner strength cannot be manufactured overnight. Every lasting transformation demands seasons invisible to the impatient eye. Modern psychology reflects the same principle. Small habits repeated consistently reshape identity more effectively than dramatic efforts maintained briefly. The brain itself changes through gradual repetition. Confidence develops through accumulated experience. Trust grows through dependable actions performed again and again. Nature and the human mind seem to speak the same language. Steady progress. There is another old story about a sculptor who spent months striking the same enormous block of marble. Visitors mocked him. "You have accomplished nothing." Music, they laughed. The stone looked unchanged. Then one afternoon, after another careful strike, the entire block split perfectly along its hidden line. The spectators applauded the final blow. Music. The sculptor quietly shook his head. It was never the last strike alone. It was every patient strike before it. How often do we misjudge our own progress in the same way? We assume today's effort accomplished nothing because visible change has not yet appeared. Yet unseen foundations are forming, skills are developing, perspective is maturing, character is strengthening, roots are quietly spreading beneath the surface. The harvest belongs not only to those who begin, it belongs to those who continue. Ask yourself honestly, where have you become impatient with your own growth? Which dream have you measured too quickly? Which season have you mistaken for failure simply because its work remained hidden? Remember the olive tree. Its greatness was never produced by urgency. It was produced by faithful seasons. Remember the seed. Its deepest work happened underground. Remember the sculptor. Every invisible effort prepared the visible breakthrough. Time does not reward frantic rushing. It rewards steady faithfulness, trust, steady progress over immediate reward. For the finest fruits of life almost always ripen in silence before they appear in the light. Chapter 11. Identity Shapes Destiny. There is a quiet question that follows every human being throughout life, though few ever stop long enough to hear it. Who do you believe you are? Not the name written on official records, not the profession others recognize, not the titles collected over the years, but music. The silent identity whispered within your own mind when no one else is listening. For it is this unseen identity music that quietly directs nearly every choice you make. Long before your feet walk a path, your mind has already decided whether you belong upon it. An old philosopher once wrote that people rarely become what they desire. They become what they repeatedly believe themselves to be. Music, at first glance, this seems too simple to carry much weight. Yet the elders who observe generations of men and women notice the same mysterious pattern. Two individuals could possess equal talent, equal opportunity, and equal intelligence. Yet their lives unfolded in remarkably different ways. The difference often began with a sentence neither of them ever spoke aloud. One quietly believed, "I am capable of learning." The other silently repeated, "This has never been for someone like me." Those hidden words became invisible architects. Every decision afterward quietly obeyed them. There is an ancient story preserved among wandering teachers about a young shepherd who dreamed of becoming a keeper of wisdom. Whenever scholars passed through his village, he followed them from a distance, fascinated by their calm speech and thoughtful questions. Yet he never approached them. When friends encouraged him, he always answered the same way. "I am only a shepherd." Years passed. One evening, an elderly traveler noticed the young man sitting alone beside a fire, reading scraps of discarded parchment he had collected along the roads. The old traveler watched silently before asking a curious question. "Who taught you that you are only one thing?" The shepherd looked puzzled. "I have always been this." The traveler smiled. "You have always cared for sheep." He pointed gently toward the worn parchments, "But your mind has been tending wisdom for years." Those words disturbed the young shepherd more deeply than any lecture. For the first time, he realized he had mistaken his occupation for his identity. His work had described what he did. It had never defined who he could become. That single realization transformed his future. Years later, he became one of the most respected teachers of his generation. His knowledge did not suddenly appear. It had been growing quietly the moment he stopped imprisoning himself inside an old description. The ancient mystery schools understood this principle with remarkable clarity. Music, before initiates received advanced teachings. They often underwent long periods of preparation designed to reshape their understanding of themselves. They were not merely taught new information. They were invited to become new people. Old assumptions were questioned. Old fears were examined. Old identities were slowly released. The teachers understood something that modern psychology would later confirm. New knowledge rarely changes a life unless identity changes first. A person who secretly believes they are careless will eventually abandon careful habits. Someone convinced they are weak often stops trying before genuine limits are ever reached. Another who quietly believes they are becoming disciplined begins making decisions that gradually confirm that belief. Habits are never random. They grow naturally from identity. A musician practices because practicing is simply what musicians do. A gardener tends the soil because caring for living things has become part of who they are. A wise person continues learning because curiosity has become woven into their character. Knoxics repeated long enough become habits. Habits repeated long enough become character. Character quietly becomes destiny. This is why the smallest daily decisions matter far more than dramatic resolutions. Every time you choose honesty instead of convenience, you strengthen the identity of an honest person. Every act of patience teaches your mind that patience belongs to you. Every courageous decision, however small, becomes another stone laid upon the foundation of courage. You are always becoming someone, whether intentionally or unconsciously. An elderly sculptor once accepted a curious apprentice. On the first morning, the young man eagerly asked when he would learn to carve magnificent statues. Instead of answering, the master handed him a simple broom. "For 30 days, he said, "Sweep this workshop." The apprentice obeyed reluctantly. Each morning he swept carefully. Each evening he returned every tool to its proper place. Music. After a month, the master finally explained, "I was never teaching you to clean a room. I was teaching you to become someone who leaves order wherever he walks." Years later, visitors admired not only the apprentice's sculptures, but the calm discipline that seemed to surround everything he created. His identity had shaped his craftsmanship long before his hands mastered the tools. Perhaps the most powerful name you will ever hear is not the one others call you. It is the one you quietly repeat to yourself. Be careful with it. If you constantly call yourself unlucky, broken, incapable, forgotten, or defeated, your mind begins organizing your choices around those descriptions. If instead you patiently cultivate identities rooted in wisdom, integrity, kindness, resilience, discipline, and gratitude, your daily actions gradually begin reflecting those qualities. Identity is not built through empty affirmation. It is built through repeated evidence. Become the kind of person who keeps promises, who learns continuously, who serves generously, who speaks thoughtfully, who remains steady when circumstances become uncertain. Eventually, those actions no longer require effort. They become natural, just as rivers naturally seek the sea. Today, choose carefully the name you silently give yourself. Then begin living as though that person already exists, because perhaps they do, waiting patiently for your daily choices to introduce them to the world. Live from your chosen identity, for destiny rarely changes before identity does. Chapter 12. Resistance music creates bondage. There is a difficult truth that every generation eventually discovers. Life does not become lighter simply because we argue with it. Many people spend years fighting realities that have already arrived. They resist aging. They resist disappointment. They resist unexpected change. They resist mistakes that cannot be undone. And in doing so, they unknowingly create a second burden heavier than the first. The original difficulty and the exhausting struggle against its existence. The ancient philosophers recognized this long before modern psychology gave it language. Pain may arrive without invitation. Suffering often grows from resistance. This does not mean accepting injustice or abandoning responsibility. It means seeing reality clearly before deciding wisely. An old sailor once took a young apprentice on his first voyage across a restless sea. The boy believed strength meant controlling the wind. Whenever powerful gusts pushed against the sails, he pulled desperately upon every rope, shouting in frustration as though determination alone could command the weather. The old captain watched quietly. Finally, he walked to the center of the deck, loosened one rope, tightened another, and gently turned the rudder. Within moments, the ship began moving smoothly once again. The apprentice stared in amazement. "You changed the wind," the captain laughed softly. "No, I changed my response. The sea remained exactly the same, yet everything about the journey changed." This story became one of the oldest lessons among experienced navigators because it revealed a truth extending far beyond oceans. Life rarely asks whether we approve of its conditions. Storms arrive, seasons change, people leave, plans collapse, time continues moving. Our freedom begins the moment we stop demanding that reality become different before we choose our next action. The Stoic philosophers returned to this lesson repeatedly. They encouraged their students to distinguish between events and responses. Events often lie beyond immediate control. Responses remain profoundly our own. This distinction transformed ordinary people into remarkably resilient ones. Imagine two travelers caught in the same unexpected rainstorm. The first curses the sky, complains endlessly, and spends the entire journey wishing reality were different. The second quickly finds shelter, protects what matters, and continues walking once the rain begins to soften. Neither traveler controlled the weather. Only one controlled himself. Music, acceptance is often misunderstood. Many believe it means surrendering dreams or settling for less. The ancient teachers meant something entirely different. Acceptance is simply the willingness to begin from truth instead of illusion. A physician cannot heal an illness they refuse to acknowledge. A builder cannot repair a cracked foundation by pretending it is whole. A traveler lost in the mountains cannot find the correct path while insisting they have never wandered. Reality becomes useful the moment we stop arguing with it. Modern psychology reaches a similar conclusion. Research consistently shows that acknowledging emotions and circumstances without becoming consumed by them often reduces unnecessary distress and improves problem solving. Denial prolongs suffering. Acceptance creates mental space for thoughtful action. The bamboo survives fierce storms because it bends. The mighty oak sometimes breaks because it refuses. Flexibility has always been one of nature's quiet forms of strength. Consider water once more. When it encounters a mountain, it does not waste centuries demanding the mountain disappear. It adapts. It curves. It flows. Eventually, the mountain itself begins yielding to the patient persistence of water. Gentleness accomplishes what force often cannot. Ask yourself honestly, what reality have you been exhausting yourself trying to deny? A conversation that cannot be undone. A season that has already changed. A disappointment that continues demanding your attention. Perhaps your greatest freedom does not lie in changing the circumstance immediately. Perhaps it begins by asking a different question. Given what is true now, what is the wisest response available to me? That question opens doors that resistance keeps locked. The old captain never conquered the sea. He learned to sail it. The Stoics never promised lives free from hardship. They taught minds capable of meeting hardship with dignity. The bamboo never defeated the storm. It simply refused to become its victim. Life will continue changing. The winds will continue shifting. Your deepest freedom will never come from controlling every circumstance. It will come from mastering the way you meet them. Try your response before demanding different circumstances. For the person who learns to adjust their sails can continue moving forward even when the winds refuse to change. Chapter 13. The hidden rule behind every victory. Music. There is an old legend about a forgotten temple hidden beyond a chain of mountains where only the most patient travelers ever arrived. For generations, seekers crossed deserts and forests, believing that within its inner chamber lay a single scroll containing the greatest secret ever entrusted to humanity. Kings searched for it. Philosophers debated its existence. Wanderers devoted entire lifetimes to finding its gates. When at last a traveler reached the sanctuary, he expected to discover one magnificent revelation capable of transforming his life in an instant. Instead, he found something unexpected. The walls of the chamber were covered not with one teaching, but with many. Each appeared simple on its own. One spoke of gratitude, another of patience, another of disciplined speech, another of courage, another of imagination, another of faith. Disappointed, the traveler turned to the elderly guardian. I crossed the world for this. These are teachings I have heard before. The guardian smiled gently. No, you have heard them separately. He paused, allowing silence to complete the lesson. You have never lived them together. Those words became the traveler's true discovery. For the ancient masters rarely believed wisdom existed as isolated ideas. They understood that life is shaped by systems, not fragments. A single seed cannot become a forest without water, sunlight, fertile soil, and time. Remove one element and the whole process weakens. So it is with human character. Many people search for one secret powerful enough to transform everything. One perfect habit, one hidden technique, one mysterious phrase. Yet history quietly suggests another truth. The greatest victories rarely arise from one extraordinary act. They grow from ordinary principles working together with remarkable consistency. Faith gives direction. Gratitude preserves perspective. Imagination reveals possibilities. Patience protects long-term vision. Character sustains every choice. When enthusiasm begins to fade, together they form something far greater than their individual parts. Imagine a master builder preparing to construct a magnificent bridge across a wide river. Faith inspires him to believe the crossing is possible. Imagination allows him to see the finished bridge before the first stone is placed. Gratitude keeps him mindful of every worker, every tool, and every lesson learned along the way. Patience reminds him that foundations hidden beneath the water matter more than visible towers. Character compels him to build honestly even where no future traveler will ever notice his craftsmanship. Roam any one of these qualities and the bridge eventually fails, leave them united, and generations cross safely because of work they never witnessed. Life follows the same pattern. Ancient teachers often compared the human soul to an instrument. A single string, no matter how beautiful, cannot produce a symphony. Only when every string is tuned into harmony does music emerge. Likewise, wisdom becomes powerful only when its principles cooperate. Faith without patience becomes frustration. Imagination without character becomes fantasy. Gratitude without action becomes sentiment. Patience without purpose becomes stagnation. Character without hope becomes rigid endurance. Each virtue quietly strengthens another. Centuries ago, an elderly potter accepted two apprentices. Both learned the same techniques. Both possessed similar skill. Yet one became renowned throughout the region, while the other abandoned the craft after only a few years. Visitors assumed the successful apprentice possessed extraordinary talent. The old potter disagreed. He simply practiced every lesson. The unsuccessful apprentice loved inspiration. The successful one loved discipline. One waited until he felt motivated. The other returned to the workshop every morning regardless of mood. One sought dramatic improvement. The other trusted steady refinement. After 20 years, their daily choices had quietly become entirely different lives. The ancients never underestimated repetition. They understood that identity is carved not by isolated moments of brilliance, but by countless ordinary decisions made faithfully over time. A river shapes valleys through persistence. A tree reaches the sky through seasons. A wise life is built exactly the same way. Modern psychology echoes this timeless observation. Habits reinforce one another. A person who practices gratitude often becomes more resilient. Music greater resilience supports patience. Patience strengthens wise judgment. Wise judgment nurtures confidence. Confidence encourages courageous action. Growth becomes a living cycle. Every virtue quietly feeds another. Perhaps this explains why truly remarkable people often appear balanced rather than extreme. They possess courage without recklessness, humility without weakness, confidence without arrogance, ambition without desperation. Their strength does not come from mastering one quality. It comes from allowing many qualities to mature together. Ask yourself a simple question. Which part of your inner foundation have you been neglecting? Have you cultivated vision while forgetting patience? Discipline while forgetting gratitude? Hope while neglecting character? Return to the whole. Life responds remarkably when the inner life becomes integrated rather than divided. The hidden rule behind every lasting victory has never been hidden because it was complicated. It remained hidden because most people search for shortcuts instead of harmony. Do not seek one miraculous breakthrough. Become the kind of person whose daily habits, music, quietly prepare countless breakthroughs. Practice consistently, for greatness is rarely a single achievement. It is 1,000 faithful moments woven together until they become a life. Chapter 14. The final secret of the game of life. Every ancient path eventually arrives at the same quiet doorway. Different teachers give it different names. Music, different cultures tell different stories. Different generations decorate it with music, different symbols. Yet beyond every philosophy, every parable, music, and every lesson waits the same profound realization. The greatest victory has never been over life. It has always been over oneself. Imagine standing before an enormous labyrinth built long before memory. Thousands have entered. Many wandered endlessly. Some blamed the walls. Others cursed fate. Many believed the maze itself was their enemy. Music. Then one old traveler discovered something astonishing. The labyrinth had never been changing. He had each music time fear governed his decisions. He chose familiar dead ends. Each time impatience demanded quick answers, he overlooked quiet passages. Each time pride convinced him he already knew the way, he walked confidently toward another wall. But when awareness replaced impulse, the maze seemed almost to rearrange itself. The walls had not moved. His perception had. The game had always followed rules. He had simply never learned them. Perhaps life is more like that ancient labyrinth than we realize. We often assume the outer world alone determines our experience, yet the principles explored throughout this journey suggest something deeper. Scarcity begins within before it appears without. Imagination quietly shapes direction. Gratitude sharpens perception. Patience protects long-term growth. Faith softens unnecessary struggle. Identity influences every daily choice. Acceptance transforms resistance into wisdom. Each principle appears separate until viewed from above. Then they become one, like rivers flowing toward the same sea. Many people spend decades attempting to master circumstances while neglecting the one territory always closest to them, their own consciousness. They seek certainty before courage, results before discipline, peace before self-standing. Yet the ancient philosophers gently reverse the order. Master the inner world, the outer world becomes easier to navigate. Not because every circumstance suddenly obeys your wishes, but because you no longer surrender your peace to every changing wind. A seasoned navigator understands that the sea cannot be controlled. The weather cannot be negotiated. The tides cannot be commanded. Yet with wisdom, preparation, and disciplined attention, the journey remains possible. Life asks for the same kind of mastery. There will still be unexpected storms. Disappointments will still arrive. Time will continue changing everything it touches. But fear no longer becomes your captain. Impatience no longer holds the compass. Resentment no longer chooses the direction you do. This is freedom, not freedom from challenge. Music, freedom within challenge. An old sage nearing the end of his life was asked to summarize everything he had learned after decades of study. His students expected a long discourse. Instead, he simply drew a small circle in the sand. Music pointing to its center, he said, "Stand here." The students waited for more. There is no more. When your thoughts, words, actions, gratitude, music, patience, imagination, and character all meet in one place, life becomes surprisingly clear. He erased the circle with his foot. The map was never outside you. Perhaps that has always been the deepest mystery. Life is not merely something happening to you. It is also something happening through you. Every thought becomes a seed. Every habit becomes a path. Every response becomes another chapter in the story you are quietly writing. You cannot choose every event. You can always choose the spirit in which you meet it. And over many years, that choice shapes far more than most people imagine. So if there is one final lesson worthy of carrying forward, let it be this. Do not waste your life trying to force reality into submission. Learn its rhythms, respect its seasons, cultivate your character, guard your attention, strengthen your gratitude, exercise your imagination, walk with patient confidence. And when circumstances become uncertain, return once again to the only place genuine mastery has ever begun, your own mind. Because in the end, the greatest transformation is not that life suddenly becomes easier. It is that you become wiser, and wisdom has always been the highest victory. Remember these words whenever the road grows difficult. Life changes the moment you stop fighting the game and begin understanding its rules. Master yourself first. Everything else begins there.